Let's actually go right back to the beginning of what you were doing and how you worked your way
Got
into
into it?
casting.
Well, I studied film, really the theory of communications in college, and I went straight to New York and got a job in acquisitions at a pretty schlocky production company, and it was a very dissatisfying culture and experience for me. So I started to do some social work for the city of New York investigating child abuse and neglect. And I stayed there for about a year and a half and really realized that I just had a full-on interest and kind of intuition about people and their emotional kind of life. And while doing that, it was a time in New York where they didn't have a word to it, but it was really kind of independent cinema was starting to happen, and I was very drawn to new filmmakers, a lot that were studying at NYU and Columbia, and I just on the side was doing kind of, took a cinematography class, and sort of got more into film again, and somebody suggested, you should really go into casting. You're very good with people. And I knew somebody who knew Julia Taylor. And I don't know if you all know who she is, but she was really the most kind of sought after casting director of the time. And she was most prominently known for being the casting director for Woody Allen. So that was sort of my master class. And I worked with her from an internship to eventually partnering with her on some of the Woody Allen movies. And I would say that that was for about 15 years, all told. And that got me into casting and sort of being very, very fortunate to have a mentor like Juliet, so I really understood the creative process of casting, the intimacy that one can have with the director, being involved in the process always, and also the practicality of being a successful casting director, understanding the business side of it all, from being very proactive in relation to directors, to making deals, making suggestions, relationship really with the business. Big part of it is foreseeing problems and being a problem solver, and it got me ready for my own business, and it's an enduring friendship that I have with her, and it really informed my working with Woody Allen, informed my casting life.
Let's stay with Woody Allen, because it's interesting looking at, first of all, your role as a casting assistant and then moving on to being a casting director. You joined Juliet in working with Woody at a time where he'd moved away from more intimate dramas based on a small number of characters to that period where he was creating very expansive works, crimes and misdemeanors, husbands and wives, that involved not just a large cast, but a very contrasting cast. I've heard a lot about his process of how he chooses people, and I don't know if that's remained for the whole of his career. I know people get a script through the post and saying, you've got to read it for a day.
Not even in the post.
Oh, they have to go to a room
You'd have
or
to go to
something.
a room, yes.
Was that always the way, even when you started?
Always the way, and everybody will be familiar with the term sides, so it's really a scene that you read, and we were crossed out, description of a character to description of, any narrative. So it was just about the character, just about saying the words.
So,
yeah,
in terms of the working relationship with Woody, how did that go about? Did he come in with a list of people he thought, actually, I've written this character, or you?
Never. It was always that was what I observed. That's why I call it my masterclass. It was really intense conversations with sort of handwritten lists of names that often he didn't know, and descriptions of why they would be correct for a part, and kind of layered conversations about that to introducing him, to everybody. along the way. Everybody had to come to the office to meet him.
And over time, how did moving from casting assistant to casting director, the responsibilities, how did that shift for you over time?
Well,
with him,
Juliet was always part of it. Although when my first credit as a casting director was a movie called Celebrity, which in the box office didn't do so well, but if you go back and look at the cast, it's pretty incredible, and expansive, and it's just checking it off, just coming up with suggestions, really not needing to kind of run it by him, but more introduce him with everybody. Sometimes he would need somebody to read. Sometimes he could just meet somebody. It's, again, the bit about casting, which I kind of connect to being, the kind of vulnerability of being an actor. Sometimes it's just not a science. It's very instinctual. Why this fits, why this part fits this person.
It's interesting you mentioned Celebrity. I watched that again in advance of this chat, and I was really surprised that Leonardo DiCaprio's part in the film, it's about a quarter of an hour, 20 minutes within the film, and he's got this tiny entourage, and Sam Rockwell is one of the entourage who doesn't even, I don't think he even has a line in the film.
Yeah.
But he really stands out.
Yeah, Sam was, somebody that I had, did a teeny tiny film with, I would say probably in 1994 or something like that. He was kicking around New York for a long time. Yeah.
And stay again with Woody Allen for the moment, because the next film that you worked with him on, I think is one of the best films he's made, Sweet and Lowdown. That was an incredibly diverse cast, and beyond Sean Penn as the central character, I'm very curious about some of the roles that you sort of and Woody Allen went with, such as Samantha Morton.
So Samantha Morton was pretty unknown at the time, and what was the movie that I thought?
Under the Skin?
It was.
Carey
Under the
film,
Skin, and it was was sublime, and so it was a suggestion that I had, and she came in and met Woody, and at the same time, and we're going to talk about it again. At the same time, there was a movie called Jesus' Son, that it was her moment, at least for American cinema, I think, right there. So I cast her in that as well.
But it's that interesting thing as well with Sweet and Lowdown, in that you have Uma Thurman as well, not just finding that right role for that single character, but seeing how they work within the landscape of all the other characters. And it is amazing. I think one of the reasons that film works so well is that they are complementary or conflicting with the different characters, particularly the female characters.
Yes, it's true. Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit? Let's talk about gender within the workplace, within your role.
Okay, so being gender specific right now, being a female, I think you would probably find that, and I don't know if this is what you mean, that women sort of dominate the casting world.
I actually thought you were going to stop there and say women dominate.
Women dominate.
And thank you for coming.
Yeah. We do, and I think it has to do with kind of women taking care of women and being calming you down and looking out for each other and sort of being a hostess in a way. And I don't mean to kind of belittle what we do. I think it's hugely important and sort of like wink, wink, like really the key to the inner workings of who you see on the screen. So I think that that, dare I say, it's like women and gay men.
And how did that impact you? You mentioned at the start about this scene in the early 90s, and we're going to come back to it a couple of times. Did that also have a big impact as well, the wider spectrum of the analysis of gender within a lot of these films?
Analysis of gender being...
Just a lot of films from Todd Haynes looking at sexuality, Christine Vachon as a major producer choosing a specific worldview. And I wondered about your role within that.
I don't know. We could maybe come back to that. Okay. I don't know if it's gender, but I just almost don't even think of it that way. It's just such an amazing fit. So maybe there's a sensitivity to it that is that kind of really blooms, you know, really kind of makes it special. But I don't know. We can ask the audience about that. I don't know.
Let's. You mentioned Jesus' Son. We're going to talk about that in a moment. We've got a clip from this film. It's 1999, directed by Alison MacLean. If you can show the next clip, please. That's Jesus' Son. It's Billy Crudup, Samantha Morton, and possibly the finest pair of underpants in contemporary cinema. We were talking about a week ago on the phone and about industry pressure, and you used the quote in relation to this film, "Go find famous people for the movie." Could you talk about that?
Okay. So this was a seminal film. Well, it's an amazing film, but it was seminal for me because it was Allison and the producer sent me the book, so I was involved basically from soup to nuts, and you know, many different writings of the script, and finding the correct people, that sort of like conversations with the producer that was one of the financiers, and so Billy was an very up and coming, and Sam was, you know, fantastic, but neither of them triggered the money that was needed that made the financing, you know, possible and comfortable. So they asked me to, okay, it's a green light, but please, we need people of note. So it was, you know, on the job training, and just because it's also important to sort of connect to things that you feel passionate about, although it's maybe an overused expression, but I just knew we could make this film, and it was huge on collaboration, so it just worked out. So Holly Hunter, Dennis Larry, who was very fine, popular at the time, Dennis Hopper, who am I forgetting? Really made the producers comfortable, and us too, because it was a great idea of like, okay, we're getting people of note, but it makes sense with the story. And then it was a chance when to find new talent. So it was Michael Shannon, maybe one of his first films, maybe, no, definitely, and Jack Black.
Now, I gather
Jack Black was in it.
Jack Black's role was different.
He was. I mean, I was shared this, so I hope this comes off okay. But it was a hard part, and it was written as an African American, and it just wasn't working in all the auditions we were doing. And there was a comedian that I had seen some of his stuff, and I suggested this guy named Jack Black. Maybe it works in some way, and he auditioned for it and got it. Yeah. So going off subject a little bit, it was the first time I think that I sort of experienced the idea of how people, casting, triggered comfort, triggered money, and how powerful and frustrating that can be, and that has sort of stayed with, I would say, the art and commerce of filmmaking, of casting, and I'm pretty good at the game, I think. I enjoy it often when the team is correct, but how instincts of what people need and want is pleasing to the aesthetic of a film and pleasing to the financing of the film, and kind of need and want and money, and it's continued in my business in a huge way.
And this isn't really something that's specific to a certain bracket of budget, is it?
It really isn't. I mean, it's expensive to make films, even a low-budget film, when you're just thinking, hey, I got a low-budget film. Well, a low-budget film is still $1 million, you know? So, but yes, as high as you can go, as low as you can go, it's always about recognizing people, being able to market people, and that kind of, that sensitivity is a big part of casting that I think it is on the job training. In a way, it was not how I started out. I didn't know that there was such a thing, but I kind of appreciate that side of the brain, where it's not about it connects a lot of elements.
Like I say, it's trying to balance filmmaking as an art form with the fact that someone is handing over rather a lot of money.
That's right.
I remember when the Thin Red Line, Terrence Malick's film, came out, and the critical viewpoint, or a lot of the criticism was leveled at the fact that 3/4 of the way through the movie, George Clooney suddenly makes an appearance. Why is he there? Why are these people there? But you look from your perspective, it makes total sense that this guy's been somewhere in the wilderness for 20 years, suddenly comes out of the blue to return to make a film, and he wants to make a huge World War II epic.
Yeah.
Bums
I mean,
on seats.
it's also just that kind of weird kismet thing of like, oh well, they weren't famous when I cast them. You know, that's a different thing, obviously, that kind of within the structure can.
So you mentioned with Alison that you were there with the nuts and bolts at the beginning. I'm curious about elements of the process, and obviously each film might be different, but your preferred way of working.
Well, I mean, it kind of veers into a kind of process of work, and I think that it starts again with the people and the filmmakers. So when there's, I'm lucky that it is a relational business, and so my preferred way is to work with people that, in a way, want to work with me and understand me. That's the kind of the intimacy and success of, I think, that when it truly works, and then did I answer the question?
Yeah, and in terms of receiving the script and research, I'm very curious about how you go about. You receive the script, you read through. It's something you engage with.
Right.
What happens?
Can be informed by maybe who's attached to the film, and sometimes there's nobody. Maybe there's one person, and so it kind of starts from them. So usually for me, just it's very personal. So I'll read it and I'll see. Okay, is this is it a script that I think is ready? You know, with all due respect, and so it starts with that, and then from there it's thinking of ideas, conversations with the director or producer, and then again bridging the people of note with people that maybe are correct for the part, which is super fun, and then from there maybe getting ideas from. So then maybe it's greenlit, and maybe it's not, like in the case of the Jesus' Son situation, and then it's soliciting ideas from people in our industry, like agents and managers, and then it sort of goes on from there. So research comes from understanding things from character to time period to do we need to do a real search for unknowns? How are we going to find that? How are we going to find those people? To just auditioning a ton of people that maybe are represented.
Interesting example. Some people might have seen recently over here Anton Corbijn's Life, the James Dean film, opened, and you have Dane DeHaan and Robert Pattinson in the lead. But what amazed me with that is this recreation of a period, and it's not just a period that we might recognise as that's 1950s New York and that amazing actors playing Eartha Kitt. What really impressed me is when we go back to James Dean's home.
Right.
How do you recreate the 1950s in a rural area of America that isn't necessarily so specific to a milieu that we recognize?
Right, and that's really, that's when, again, the collaboration really makes sense, where there's talented people as heads of departments. So you're working seamlessly, at different times with people that are doing wardrobe and production design, and maybe in research that I've done, it's the music of the time to what people look like, or the environment that informs what actors fit in for whatever reason. super important in that way.
And obviously, you also have like Dennis Stock's photography.
Yes,
Anton
exactly.
Corbin, who's himself a photographer
Right,
who wants
right.
a
So
certain reality.
that was photography was a huge part of that. That was pretty easy. Yeah.
And could you talk a little bit about the team that you would actually work with? Obviously, it depends on the size of a production, but how does that do people sort of go off with various roles and then come back with ideas, or how does that kind of work if you have?
Or you mean in the audition, like the idea of
who to cast or audition?
Well, it's a little bit of everything, I would say. Maybe I'll think of somebody for one part, but they could be 3 other parts at the same time. So you may write next to their name that you're auditioning for this part, but there are 2 other parts in this part that in this movie or TV show that they could be for. So it is, again, making it stand out. So, oh gosh, there's 3 people with the same height or structure of their nose that needs to be different, and you adjust.
In the conversations we've had, you've been very passionate about a lot of the directors, filmmakers, and craft people that you work with. And it's only hearing you talk now, I'm curious about the distance that you feel you have to have when you know there's someone who's perfect for a role, and it's not going to go that way, and how difficult that is for you, and whether you've sort of built coping mechanisms over your time, such as biting your lip.
That's a tough one to answer, because I'll say, like, part of my process is I'm not super dogmatic. I think one reason I like what I do, and hopefully we'll keep doing it, is it's a little bit organic every time. So it's almost like, okay, like I've never done it before, even though I know what I'm doing, and that comes often with the specific people that I think about for a part. I'm absolutely positive that they're correct, and there's a difference of opinion that again, the balance of respect and really staying on it. So I would say that I talk to myself a lot, or talk to the people in my office, like, okay, I just don't understand, why is this person not correct for this part, and I'll just maybe keep writing the name down and make sure that the person's still available, just to kind of keep it alive, and knowing when to stop and knowing when to be a nuisance is, again, hard to put in words. It's just vibing with the situation.
An instinct, again, going back to your early experience. And working out which actors to use. Again, coming from outside, it's very easy for me to go, I understand why that person is in that role because I saw them in that film. But I'm curious about how much of someone's career you look at as a whole, or do you focus on certain roles when choosing?
It's again how to sort of get your point or your idea met with success, and it depends who you're speaking with. I think it's always wonderful to look at somebody's best work, so that might be enough to keeping things positive as much as you can.
And obviously it depends on the stage of someone's career, but do you have a preferred way of viewing work? Do you prefer to look at previous audition tapes if they're available, or do you prefer to see performance? Or?
Performance, I would say performance. Previous tapes, sure. I will. That can be absolutely helpful. Yeah.
And at what stage, generally, you've talked about Woody Allen, but do you find that you tend to involve directors within the process if it's not been cast yet, or if there aren't names attached to a project?
So in bringing them ideas, you mean? Okay, so if it's just full on casting as one can imagine happens, that you set up a day of meeting and reading actors. That can go on for a period of time, whittled down by me. So maybe I'll, depending on who the director is, I'll say, okay, let's show 5 to 10 people, and then there's feedback. Go this direction, go in this direction. Okay, we've got it. Maybe the first time that they've heard it out loud. So that's being, like, especially if it's a writer-director.
Yep.
So it's like, wow, this didn't work, or it did work, and why? And I may have to really go back to the drawing board and start all over again. Yeah, it just depends. Yeah.
And I'm curious about the experience and whether you've sort of not become inured to the thrill of that sort of hitting the mark. But is it still that?
Love it. I love it. I love it. I
No,
love
be
it.
honest.
Yeah, no, I do love it. And there's always a little bit of nervousness around it, that I'm going to get it right, or that I'll know how to get it right, that I'll help shape what is in somebody's head. So it's sort of interpreting. It's sort of like I have a lot of friends that are shrinks, that kind of idea of like, what is in your head? What are you not telling me? How can I help you figure this out? Crack this open, and ooh, maybe something's not working. Maybe we should try it this way. And being very present in what's happening, and again, back to a problem solver. Being able to really get another way to look at it.
And again, it's finding someone who's going to convey the art of filmmaking, but the fact is we come back to the business side of it still with you, that for all the will in the world to see everyone you possibly can, you still have a finite amount of time. You have a finite budget.
Right.
Again, it might depend on the project, but do you tend to find when you get to the audition process, there is generally a set number of people that you will see? Before, perhaps in the first round, and if they don't work, you see other people.
It depends. I mean, there's sometimes a relief to time. When you don't have an endless amount of time to do something, and you're working within that confine, is really can be kind of exciting, and kind of getting to the point, and sometimes there's not. So there is a mystery around this that I hope to remain mysterious, and at the same time demystify it at the same time. So it's that balance.
Hopefully we'll kind of demystify it now in relation to one director, someone who throughout the whole of your career has loomed large, is Todd Haynes. And we're going to see a clip, first of all, from his superb alternative biopic of Bob Dylan, I'm Not There, and then we'll talk about your working relationship. If you can show the clip, please. I'm Not There. For me, it's the pleasure of going back and seeing films. You were saying about people who start out and they take a tiny role at the beginning of their career and move on. I hadn't seen that film since it came out, and when you chose this clip, I watched it again. Where, oh my God, it's David Cross from Arrested Development as Allen Ginsberg.
I know.
And
eventually, I did a movie called Kill Your Darlings, and he played Allen Ginsberg's father. It was a bit of a nod, and it was also correct casting, so it worked out. Yeah.
We'll come back to Todd Haynes in a moment in terms of his wider work, but let's stay with this film. What a challenge. You've got to create a fictional biopic of one of the most well-known living artists, in which you've cast a whole different number of people. So what were the first series of conversations that Todd had with you?
I don't even know. It was so long. It was, I remember where I was when I was reading it. It was just this idea of deconstructing a kind of icon person, and the meaning of that, and splitting it up, and so sort of finding the essence of this this person in these people, and it spanned time periods, and it was kind of inventive, and it was a complete joy and challenge to I'm not being specific, but maybe we can, ask questions. But it was.
But I guess in a way that kind of helps, because you are
Yeah.
talking about someone who's very chameleon-like in their career.
Yeah.
And so you can have a Christian Dylan, and you can have, in the case of Cate Blanchett, the Electric Dylan.
Yes.
And I've forgotten the young boy who
Yes.
plays a young Dylan.
Yeah. And well, that was sort of representing Woody Guthrie.
Yes.
In that time period, yeah. And that kind of, yeah.
What was the process you went about it? I assume Todd had a very specific idea of who or what kind of Dylan he wanted at each point in time. But what freedom did he give you then to go out?
Everything. I mean, it was just, it didn't come with anybody that stuck, that kind of, it was just this concept of a movie that was going to be a play at one point, but didn't happen. So it was, talking about, really it was like in reading it, I was like, okay, we have to split this up in sections, and that kind of kept it motivated to the time period and to the type of actor that sort of represented Bob Dylan at the time. So, you had from Ben Whishaw, who I didn't know. It was the first time that I met him, and he auditioned for it, and to a young person playing this to a woman,
Yeah.
So it was those were in place. That those characteristics were in place before.
And I guess the surprise for me in terms of that film was Richard Gere, because
Richard was wonderful.
I really hadn't seen him do something off the mainstream for quite some time, and since you've also worked with him on what I think is one of the best performances he's given in Arbitrage. But did that come from you, and Todd just went, wow, that's cool, let's go with that?
There's definitely a process that I keep doing this because I sometimes forget what got us to the end game. But he was definitely a big Dylan fan, so that really helped. I think he is an actor that is so game and understands material that isn't mainstream, that maybe wasn't known to the outside, but I sort of know that about him. So that was super helpful, and he absolutely was part of the financing package that was important to getting an experimental film like this off the ground.
And it struck me with the Born Again Christian, the Christian Bale
Christian
character.
Bale, and
who
Todd
can we
worked
find
with him
who's going to
before.
wear a really bad hairstyle?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Christian Bale.
Christian Bale was just a gift. I mean, just a wonderful gift, and he was in Velvet Goldmine. Yeah. So Todd had an a very positive experience with him before.
And that was the first time that you worked with Todd.
Yes.
What is it
with him
about Todd Haynes?
Well, I guess it's definitely committed to long-term relationships, and I've been working with him for almost about 20 years. It's probably it is the only time that because I'm a bit shy, that I pursued. I remember writing down everything I wanted. I'd seen his films, and I wrote reasons I wanted to work with him, and I made a cold call to his producer, who I knew a little bit from working with another film director, Tom Kalin, who we've talked about.
Christine Vachon.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I called Christine, and I interviewed for the job. And I got it. I remember what I was wearing. And what makes it so special and ongoing is it's extremely, extremely immersive. And it doesn't stop and start at the office. So it sort of invites me to have an experience, a life experience that's sort of present and live. And I think I mentioned this before. So anything that I'm lucky to have this relationship. So anything that kind of ends up happening, I read early, or he'll tell me about the idea, and then it goes right to that time period, and it doesn't even matter. It's it's just like, okay, the politics of the time, or what music was happening. I may get a mixtape of what's going on, or photography, or art, or other films, and that sort of invites me to sort of shape the world. And So then it becomes extremely collaborative and satisfying and creative, and it's extremely unconditional. So it just flows in the most amazing way. So there's a trust that as I get older, it's what I want. I want there to be a trust on both sides. So I invite that to new filmmakers or ongoing filmmakers that I work with, because I think I have a pretty positive you can see it on the screen. So it's I so appreciate the opportunities that we have together. And I will say that there are choices that are made that aren't always the best choices, that we can talk about, that it isn't, the thing about casting, it's so important. I just really want to get it all correct, but sometimes it's life. It just doesn't happen that way, and something's off, and I don't necessarily have performance anxiety about that. And I think that sort of ongoing, highly collaborative and creative experience, we've matured together and understand the business side of things, that it's respected. And I hope from that I can kind of give to my other experience, which I think I have. Yeah.
I'll open to the audience in a moment, but I want to look at 3 projects you've worked on together that are all period. Perhaps we could do Far From Heaven and Carol together in a way, because they're set within, Mildred Pierce's as well, but because that was a miniseries, we'll do that separately. But I'm curious about the casting, particularly Far From Heaven, outside of Julianne Moore. It was interesting to watch Far From Heaven when it came out and have Dennis Haysbert, who pretty much everyone who watched television at the time knew as the president from 24.
Oh, right, he was in 24, which hadn't been on yet.
Yeah, it
hadn't been on yet. It was just about, because it became talk about using the kind of smarts of the business. It was like having to get him out of 24 became a hit. So is he going to be available for shooting on the? That was a feat.
And the other character in Patricia Clarkson, who had been in very many solid performances at the time, but this was one of the first times where I thought suddenly the profile had increased. I'm curious about her character, though. For anyone who hasn't seen Far From Heaven, she's the best friend of a woman who finds out that her husband is gay. And it's interesting, she's got very double standards. And you think she's quite a liberal person, Patricia Clarkson's character, and then she turns very quickly. And it struck me, it's a very difficult performance in a very tough character, and she nails it completely.
She does, yes.
Could you talk about the discussions that you had with her about this character?
With Todd about the character?
And then with Patricia
with
herself.
her, I didn't, it's often like I sort of unleash it, right? So it's sort of like I don't have a relationship like that with an actor. Maybe I've known them early on when they audition or they come to my office, but it's more like conversation with the director. Well, what is it about her? Now, the thing about Far From Heaven was it was sort of based on Douglas Sirk style and performance, and this was a grand, just open opportunity for, I'm New York based, proud of being New York based, and similar to London, it's an opportunity to act a lot in theater, and Far From Heaven had a theatricality about it, a kind of sort of technicolor sensibility, and so we were really looking for theatrical performances that, understood cinema, but was able to kind of be over the top, and Patricia just as an absolute flair for kind of reality-based, emotional, female. Yeah. So that was, and it was a really wonderful contrast to Julianne Moore.
And again, another project set during this period, Mildred Pierce. This was a 6-hour, and it is TV, but it also, when you watch it, it kind of feels like just a very long film. It's a 6-hour miniseries.
Right.
Did you approach it differently?
No, not really. I mean, it was because it was 6 hours. It's almost like doing having more time to do a film, and so we really, he could just, maybe I'm forgetting, but it different structures of how you make a deal and how you hire an actor and eventual residuals maybe for actors, but it was not, the approach was extremely seamless for me.
So from your point of view, working with HBO is just, it was a case of working with another studio and not anything different at all.
Yes, it was very positive, extremely positive and creative, for sure. And hopefully that starts with, with Todd and his, again, being able to be inclusive and secure about his art.
And generally, thinking about television and the way it's progressed in the last 15-odd years, do you feel that certain parts of the landscape have changed as a result of that and the impact of that on films?
It's probably an ongoing question, and I think that it, when I first started out, there was a huge separation. I would say there was film and TV and actors that did one or the other, more or less, and then theater sort of floated. And now it's seamless, I would say, and it just becomes availability because TV takes up a huge amount of time, and there's so much of it. So it's wonderful that it's, full-on employment, and it can be frustrating because of availability of an actor. Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, without a doubt, it's, project dependent and role dependent, and it is still a organization to how we look for actors, but it absolutely not, and it might be financial, that we can't afford if something's shooting in the U.S. or if you don't have a green card or whatever visa, that can present a problem, but there's no problem otherwise.
So do you feel like it would help to fly there and meet people? Is that actually possible to meet casting directors?
I think that's not especially at the beginning, not essential. I think learning how to self-tape is super important. Learning how to audition, which is another part of what we've talked about. Yeah. I hate to say this, and it could be different here, but it is internship. So it's often not being paid for your services and just on-the-job training. Then hopefully you can, I don't know if you've ever done it before, so you may just, like, if you have and it's for you, then it'll happen. But just being open to, or being able to afford to, I know, it's hard. Yeah.
What about possible?
The offices are often very small, and so that's hard. So you're looking for experience, and if you don't have experience, it's a sort of being an actor and not being in a union, and it shouldn't stop you from wanting to act. Eventually, you will be in the union. So,
with a number of the craft masterclasses that we have here, and audience members asking questions, they say, "How can I work with this?" A Scorsese or someone.
Right.
And a number of people have said, no, find the Scorsese of your own generation. Because in 20, 30 years'
that's
time,
a really good
what about
idea,
short
right.
films and that
I
kind of?
think it's wonderful. I mean, if you, I will say that I started casting, my husband's in the audience, and I cast his
If you could
student
leave,
film.
please.
And that's how I started. I just looked up, I just had relationships with people that were filmmakers at universities, and then I just figured it out. Yeah, so it's really important and most interesting to find, I think, new exciting directors and producers that you can hook up with somehow. Hook up. That's like me starting in the middle of a really important description, I think. Simple, so there's no distraction. So there's the sort of background that lends itself to the way you look, and that the lighting is good, the sound is good, the technical aspects are not distracting, and that meaning there's nothing in the background. There's no, animals or somebody having a meal in the back, or you reenacting what's happening. I hopefully will have an imagination. I don't need to see your girlfriend in the scene and you guys are making out. I don't need to see any of that. And then then the reader is again audible and relaxed and doesn't overwhelm.
Do you get some takes where you just think, what were they thinking?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a big part of our business, I think, now, the good and the bad, but mostly the good of technology and sort of being able to be anywhere and ultimately being cast from anywhere.
If you haven't already, you should sign up for Laura's Twitter feed, because you get the most incredible nuggets of information on a very, very regular basis. And one of the ones that fascinated me, and you mentioned it a little bit earlier, auditioning and acting are not the same thing.
Right. So you can't act if you don't know how to audition. I mean, that's very basic and, can be analyzed and thought of as not being true. But I started a side business called the Audition Lab, because I saw the kind of pitfalls of many talented, often trained actors that didn't know how to exactly transition from what they've learned in a classroom or what they thought, from an acting class, to actually auditioning. And the sort of basic skills of reading a room and being relaxed, and huge thing is being able to listen and to trust yourself and to sort of have your go-to ways of presenting yourself that really, really, really work. And I'm in a unique place of being a casting director, because it's often, yes, I decide who I'm going to bring back, but I really understand the sensitivity that you must all go through, or often go through, of being able to kind of stand out and make an impression that that I find sort of gets swallowed in the nerves and the kind of not being able to present oneself in the best way that they can. So that's why auditioning is super important to master.
One of the other things I like in your Twitter feed is, for God's sakes, don't go into an audition holding something, even if it's a bottle of water.
Really? I said that? Well, it's this kind of thing of like, I don't want to know what kind of coffee you drink, and it's put down and put up. It's sort of like a kind of clutch that is an absolute distraction. And this is your time as an actor to really make an impression, and I just want all of you, instead of the props that one brings in, to distract. That is distracting. That can't be distracting. Absolutely, but it leans on post-traumatic stress, so I can't talk about it. Yeah. I'm constantly starstruck, but not necessarily because one is a star. Just excitement of finding new people and being around creative actors, and there's a certain energy when it works and is alive. Is every time I think about maybe I should do something else, I come back.
And I'm aware one of the answers is going to be Daniel Radcliffe, but Kill Your Darlings, I thought was a very good example in looking at her career as a whole, as well as people saying you need an A-list director to go with A-list stars. You have there, and someone you've already mentioned, a stunning producer who has constantly Christine Vachon
Yeah,
fought
she
her
just
corner.
keeps pushing to
And
get it.
that was a very good example of,
Yeah.
although he'd made a few films, John Krakaitis had
Right.
not directed a feature
Right.
before. And that's a
Right.
pretty big thing to take on with one of Daniel Radcliffe's first, post-Potter films, and pretty full on.
Right, and they love each other. You know, Daniel is attached to doing another.
The Karl Rove.
Yeah, so it's attached whether it'll happen or not. But he instilled a certain confidence in actors, and a big part of getting it made was his perseverance and Christine's perseverance to secure money.
And do you think that's something that get a producer who will fight your corner?
Producers, if I get called before producers involved, it's not great. I prefer to have a producer involved. Yeah.
I do want to show another clip. This is from The Kids Are Alright. Partly because this was a film you weren't just a casting director on, you were also involved as a producer. So if we can see this clip, please. So, Julianne Moore's masterclass in expression. Why did you end up producing this film?
Oh, because I had I was asked to from one of the producers who just realized that, again, the kind of kismet of finding the actors to greenlight the film was kind of an ongoing battle for us that took a long time. And this is another example of a script that was sent with no actors attached. So it was, again, extremely collaborative and ongoing for a long time.
The other reason I'm glad you chose this film and this clip, I wondered, is casting a biological family one of the toughest things that you can do to try and get that connection?
As you know, I mean, I have a sister who's blonde hair and blue eyes. You know, you just don't know what a family's going to look like, but you want to kind of tonally be able to make it believable, so you're not distracted by why it doesn't work. So this was a little bit easier because it was really the chemistry of the couple, which is always the start of a family, I think, if you have offspring, and then the offsprings are a little bit easier. But the temperament of the offsprings were really important. The characters of them were very important to Lisa. So Mia was my first and kind of only thought, and Josh at the time wasn't that well known, and yeah. So.
The other film that you've been credited in a producer role is working with Kelly Reichardt, Meeks Cutoff, and you've worked with her twice now. And you mentioned character there, and I think that's something that's very interesting about her, because she is someone whose films seem to grow organically out of character rather than just having this plot-heavy driving narrative. Is it a challenge to cast for her films?
Well, I think to make her feel secure about who she is going to go on this journey with, because it's such an intimate journey. So sort of understanding her and who needs to kind of fit into her world is a challenge, but satisfying. Yeah.
It's interesting that you've worked on this film and then going to Olive Kitteridge, where what I found fascinating about it, and again, it's Lisa Choldenko.
Yeah, right.
But you're dealing with a character who starts off in their, I'm assuming, around 50s, and then gets...
it's about 50s, right.
And it's 20,
maybe a little bit earlier.
A little earlier, in a 25-year span. Beyond just the perception of actresses, do you feel that times with people like Lisa Choldenko, producers, that there is a shift, or is this another cocktail party?
It is. I mean, it's really hard. I mean, the thing about Olive Kitteridge is just so wonderful and so well received. It was the confidence of HBO doing it. So you had more or less a studio behind you, versus Kids Are Alright, as an example, it's strong female character that is independently financed, and that is structurally extremely different and extremely hard to still do. And this is a great example of two women that lead the pack, and finding that kind of third lead, but sort of an ensemble that had to be male, and that's another conversation about how when men follow women, and that structure of financing is quite challenging. So
And interesting.
You're still probably at advantage being a man. You know, they're
Yeah.
probably still at an advantage.
But it's interesting, as we were talking the other day, that although Mark Ruffalo had been acting in Michael Mann films
Right.
and Kenneth Lonergan,
This was a game
this
changer.
was the game
It was
changer
a game
for
changer. I
him.
really think so. It was like sort of extremely sexy role that he realized that he made sexier and funny and warm and flawed. And I think it really exploded for him after that, and I hope
It's also
in a
the role
positive way.
that accounts for my mother having a poster of him on her bedroom wall.
It is a relief when a producer, it's one of my most favorite relationships, because I think I kind of, again, that side of my brain sort of leans on producing. So I want, and I was trained to sort of be very proactive in all in all aspects of the business, which is sort of the nuts and bolts of producing. And so it's hugely important to my process. Oh, well, I'm blessed. I have pretty much of a boutique office that I've had somebody work with me for 8 years, somebody with 7 years, someone for 3 years, and we're the team. And so hopefully I'll keep getting employed, and we'll keep working together. And we sort of head different projects, and knowing me is knowing my office, and it's intimate, I think, hopefully.
Both films, Youth and Carol, as well as their gala screenings and evening screenings, do have daytime screenings, and there are tickets left for those. Thanks to the LFF and the BFI for organising this. But I should say, when we normally do these events, I have 20 minutes, half an hour to chat with the guests beforehand, and we go over questions and things like that. Laura has been absolutely amazing. Over the course of the last week, she's been diligent, she's made notes, she's been calling me up from New York to discuss what she wants to talk about. The reason the last hour and a half has been so good is because of the amount of work that she's actually put into it. So can you please join me in thanking Laura Rosenthal?
Thank you.